Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the old world. I'm really excited today to be able to talk about the first interactions I'm going to have on the tabletop with my new Orc and Goblin army. It's been quite a long time coming, but we're finally at the point where after weeks of not getting any games at all, I've been able to get a couple of matches booked in on consecutive days, no less. So at the time of recording, I'm currently putting the finishing touches to my army list, and I wanted to talk to you about what I'm going to be taking. After these two games, where I'm going to be using pretty much the same army, I think, I'll be looking at a bit of an after action to see what I could do, what I can bring in to make my force stronger, hopefully without moving too far away from that core concept, which should hopefully become fairly apparent, reasonably soon. What I would say is if you spot anything as we go through this video about things I could do better, do shout in the comments below, whether that's army building, whether I've done something daft tactically on the field. Just do please let me know. I'm really eager to learn how this army works and make it a bit more effective, so when I go to events I've got more options than just taking my empire every time. So that being said, let's turn our attention now to my army list. So to start off with, we've got characters. Now I've gone quite heavy on characters, so this might be an area where some cuts could be made. But what have I got? Well, first up, we've got an Orc war boss. He's armed with a shield, he's on a war boar, he's got the ogre blade and dead hard armor, so hopefully this gives him the speed and resilience he needs to get into combat and really ruin someone's day. He's going to be backed up by his best mate, an Orc war boss, cavalry spear, heavy armor shield. He's the battle standard bearer with the big red raggedy flag, obviously on a war boar, and he has got the headbutting axe for some extra carnage if he manages to get the charge off, which hopefully they will. Finalising my characters on war boars, there is a Orc weir knob with level 4 using elementalism. Rounding out my characters, I do also have two Night Goblin odd knobs on foot. These are both level 4 wizards, both running War Magic, and one of which has the ever-present Ruby Ring of Ruin. Turning now to core, it probably won't come any surprise at all that I've got two Night Goblin mobs, given that there's two characters here. Both units are armed with short bows, netters, and have full command. I've got a unit of 31, a unit of 41. The unit of 41 has the spider banner for those sweet, sweet poison shots. And it will come as absolutely no surprise to you that both of those units also have 3 fanatics each. My core's rounded out with 3 snotling mobs. Now turning to the special options, this is where the core of my hitting power really lies. I've got a unit of 9 Orc boar boys. They've got cavalry spears, heavy armor, shields, they're big guns and have got full command. The banner bearer is bearing the banner of butchery. So I'm hoping to get some really nice combo action with the BSB here, go crashing into enemy lines and really mess them up. They're going to be supported by 2 Orc boar chariots. Now I know Orc boar chariots do suffer a little bit because they don't have the swift stride rule. It does make them that little bit slower. So they're very much going to form a second wave to my assault. The idea being is the other units start tying up my opponent's forces, and that allows my boar chariots to get the charge, to get the impact hits, which are going to be so important, I think, for them really delivering some positive results. May well be that the chariots aren't the way forward, and 180 points for the 2 of them might be a little bit of an overspend, but only time will tell. So that is the list that I'm intending to take. Next up will be the battle reports. Let's see how I get on. Let's talk about game number 1. Now, I think it's important to put a little bit of context around where we are in the recording of this video. The part you've just heard was recorded before either of my games were played, when I was talking about the list I was going to take. This section is recorded in the immediate aftermath of game number 1, when I've just returned home. My intention was to do a bit of a blow-by-blow, taking you through a proper game report. However, I just don't think there's going to be the entertainment value in doing that. The game, sadly, was incredibly one-sided. I was up against, for my first game with the Orcs and Goblins, against Nomadic Orcs, hosted by really one of the area's best players, who it's his favourite faction to use outside of competition. I could point to the rustiness. It was my first game in many, many months, the first game with this particular faction, and I could talk about some of the luck that I had. On releasing 3 Fanatics, I managed to roll 1-1, 1-1, 3, all 3 Fanatics removing themselves from the board before they got to do anything at all. Odds which we worked out to be approximately 7,776 to 1. However, and this is a big however, the truth of the matter is I was simply outplayed, and I'd very much set myself up to play the wrong game. I'd I think, gone into this thinking too much in terms of an Empire player and not enough about how the pieces operate for a very different faction. So without going through a blow by blow, let's turn now to the positives. And despite what I've just said, there were an awful lot of positives. But wait, I hear you cry. How can there possibly be a ton of positives to come out of a game where you've just admitted to getting an absolute paddling? Well, I could say that it got me the opportunity to actually have a game. That the opponent I played against, I've played him 3 times now. He's crushed me every single time, but he's a lovely opponent to face, and it's always an enjoyable game to play him. But the big thing is, really, I always feel from playing him and having these sort of games that I come away from it a better player. I really feel as though, whilst I have lost the game quite comprehensively, I lost the game in a way that I understood. I've played games, certainly in other systems, where games have gone decisively for me or against me, and to be honest, I've never really understood why. Maybe it was a dice roll, maybe it was some sneaky tactic, a combination of rules, but you can get absolutely crushed in a game and not really understand why, and that becomes quite demoralizing. At least with this game, I was able to see what I was doing wrong, understand some of the mistakes I was making. Does that mean I'm doomed to repeat them? Maybe. But hopefully I can start to iron out some of the mistakes that I was making. What were these mistakes? I think very much I was thinking of the Orcs and Goblins basically as an Empire force. You're keeping your missile troops back, you're trying to keep them out of harm's way. I was thinking about the mass charge of my Orc ball boy biggins riding through to glory with the chariots on their flanks. The chaff operating around the flanks, trying to protect the flanks of my main forces. And that just doesn't seem to be the way to actually play this force. My threat isn't the ball boys. Yes, they're choppy, but if I run into a unit that's choppier, they're not going to be destined for greatness. The unit my opponent was most worried about was a unit of night goblins, and not because of the shooting, albeit that can be useful with the poison banner, but it's that combination of that and the fanatics, assuming they don't all wipe themselves out, coming out of the unit as they did today. I can deny space with them to force my opponent to do things they don't really want to do. And actually those hard-hitting units that I wanted to send down the centre to careen through enemy lines, they're my flankers. And the chaff that I was using to protect my flanks, that needs to be front and centre, bait those charges out, bring things on to me, get in the way, cause disruption. It's very much the opposite way of thinking to the way I would normally operate with my Empire forces. So loads and loads of lessons learned, thinking about the units differently to the way I would traditionally if they were part of a faction that I'm more familiar with. We also talked around a face-off between my Orc Ball Boys and his Orc Ball Boys is getting impact hits as well, though, because of the nomadic warband special rules. I'm finding actually that it was quite interesting that Earthen Ramparts became a really useful spell for me, because it helped switch off the impetuous nature of my Orcs to a certain degree, because you can't charge a unit if that's being cast on you, so it's an automatically failed charge. It stops me galloping off into no man's land and then having a trap set for me because of that impetuous nature of the Orcs. I'd put my Night Goblin Shamans in with the units thinking that they'd need the leadership buff. Well, actually what's more important is that 360 degree line of sight. To be honest, that's what I would do with my Empire forces. I wouldn't put wizards in units. I'd keep them separate for that 360 and to keep them potentially safe from combat. I didn't feel confident in doing that today, and I paid the price when turn 1, a long bomb charge went across the board from a vanguarding unit of frenzied Orc War Boys with a bunch of buffs, went crashing into the smaller of my 2 Night Goblins, took them out, and a Wizard Lord all in one foul swoop, and then forced my lines to constantly have to shuffle to face new threats, never really able to operate effectively. So loads and loads of learning points here. I've got another game tomorrow. My aim is to put some of this into practice. Now, my opponent tomorrow I don't think is as experienced, so maybe I won't be facing quite so many tricks of the trade, I don't know. But definitely things to work on. I've got a second game in 2 days. Let's keep our chin up and crack on and see how things go. Part 3 will be recorded after that game, so let's see what happens. Right, let's talk about game number 2. But before we do that, I do want to just make a quick correction to something I said in the game 1 section of this video. That was around the chances of rolling the 3 doubles that I did. I know that rolling 3 doubles is actually about 216 to 1. The figure being bandied about is, without doing the calcs myself, a figure that relates to the precise dice roll that I got. So, I do appreciate 3 doubles of any variety would have been enough to have had the same effect. So effectively, about, I think, 216 to 1, something along those lines. Anyway, that aside, on with the show. This time, the game was, as you can probably tell, because I'm actually talking about the game itself, an awful lot closer, and I was up against a Grand Army composition force of the Dwarves. It was a little bit of an interesting force, a little bit of everything kind of thing. So a big block of warriors, Anvil of Doom, cannon, some quarrelers, rangers, 2 units of Iron Drakes, and a gyrocopter. There was a small unit of hammerers as well, smattering of characters. Learning the lessons from the first game, I decided to be a lot more aggressive with the deployment of my Night Goblins, putting them front and centre, knowing that there was no chance at all of a long bomb charge, even if I didn't get to go first. The chariots I decided to put on my right flank behind some cover. I was wary of a cannon perched on top of a hill, and on my far left flank I put my Boar Boys, hoping to sweep up and around the flank and start to cause my opponents problems from that perspective. Helped by the fact that there was a unit of quarrelers parked far out on my opponent's right-hand flank, so I was hoping to try and get into them and then affect the rest of the lines. Needless to say, I didn't get the first turn, and I was slightly surprised when my opponent's warrior block, although not in marching order, came surging up the middle, staying just outside of range for me to do much effectively about it. My turn 1 saw a few shots being fired and a general advance, trying to get into position to do some damage. And this is kind of how it went for the next couple of turns. There were a few pot shots, a few wounds being taken here and there, an awful lot of firepower being thrown into my unit of snotlings, which really, really sucked it up. Now, I think my opponent got to the point where perhaps he was a little bit frustrated around those snotlings hanging on, and he poured an incredible amount of fire into them, which really, really helped me, I think, because it kept that firepower from more pressing units. Later in the game, when that firepower did turn against my other units, my goblins were absolutely chewed up and spat out. It's not an exchange I wanted to really be involved in. The chariots, well, they got involved in a fight with the gyrocopter, which charged one of my chariots, and after a couple of rounds of combat, lost the combat, fled, allowing me to overrun into some rangers. And I also got the other chariot to charge the survivors of the rangers after that initial fight. I was actually pretty disappointed with how the chariots got on. Both of them had taken quite a bit of shooting damage, so didn't have many wounds left. And in both cases, the champion was the only model able to strike back from the rangers squad after the combat, and each time he destroyed the chariot. Now, yes, I acknowledge that they were weakened. I think one certainly only had one wound left when it went in. But there was like 3-4 models. It wasn't able to clear them on the charge and paid the ultimate price. Maybe with something like Frenzy, that would have helped the extra attacks kicking around. Very much I see the chariots either being used in a support role or as kind of a bit of a decent chaff role. But so far, I've not really been able to find the value from them. As for my ball riders, yep, they managed to do what I hoped to do, get into the quarrelers, absolutely wrecked them, drove them off the board, and then try to push forward. Their efforts, however, to get into the rest of the line were then hindered, obviously, by my own fanatics. The slow, gradual advance of the goblins, I think, across the turns was a bit of an error. It took me quite a while to get the fanatics out, and then 4 of the 6 that I launched managed to wipe themselves out with rolling yet more doubles before they managed to get into the opponent. I did manage to get 2 of the fanatics in. They did quite a bit of damage, and then proceeded to get in the way of my own own boar boys, I should say, preventing them from making an effective charge and trying to sweep into the centre. All in all, I think I was probably still a bit too tentative with my goblins. I probably should have thrown them forward. They're not going to get an awful lot with just pinging off the odd wound or 2 from well-armoured dwarves. I think I probably gave a little bit too much respect to the Iron Drakes as well. I've seen how devastating they can be, and certainly once they got going, they really chomped through and wiped out really one of my units of Night Goblin shortbows. As the dust settled, it was actually a very close game. Just over 200 points in it, and also very low scoring. I gave up just over 600 points. My opponent gave up about 400 points, giving a very narrow defeat to the Orcs and Goblins. So, the important bit. What are the lessons learnt across the 2 games? The main point for me, I think, is being less tentative when I'm approaching the force I'm using, particularly with the Orcs and Goblins. I need to really adapt to using more controlled aggression, pushing forward at the right time, but also, of course, not leaving myself exposed and in bad positions in case of the threat of countercharges, etc. in my opponent's turn, rather than countercharge as a charge reaction. I think I've definitely come to understand to a greater extent the value of the Night Goblin Spearman as threat projection, and being, I think, more willing to push them into a position where really they're going to launch their fanatics, they're going to get a shot or 2 off, and then hopefully do enough damage to prevent someone getting in and absolutely wrecking them.
relying on the fact I've got those netters, so that's -1 to a point of strength, and there might be some spells floating around. Really liking the buffs and debuffs available to the wizards. That's proven pretty helpful. The re-rolling wands that you can get on Night Goblins short bows is excellent. But I've, as I say, not really found my chariots to be reliable enough for the force I'm using. Maybe I need to rethink how I'm using those, or maybe it's a case of actually they're going to take a cut when it comes to thinking about future iterations of the army list. I'm quite tempted to get a few Squig Riders, see how they do. They would need to replace certainly one of the chariots, which would actually enable me to potentially get a few more Snotling bases floating around as well. They do seem to be quite useful for an annoyance factor. But yeah, a lot to dwell on, I think, a lot to mull over. Definitely a much better performance in the second game, but there's still a lot to do. There's mistakes, again, being made where I think I'm struggling a little bit with those ball boys. They can be a little bit of a glass hammer. I'm aware of this, and perhaps to a certain extent too aware of this. So my big plan of flanking round and getting involved early doors, that didn't pay off. Maybe I should have actually, again, is incorporating those march columns, trying to get them up fast and furiously to really start to threaten around the flanks. One to mull for a future game. However, that's going to be it for this video. I've waffled on long enough about these first two games. If you've got any particular pointers you think are worth me paying attention to, particularly around army list building, do let me know. Once I've got to the point where my current stuff on the paint bench is done, I will have caught up with everything I've bought this year being painted, and I'm going to be looking forward to treating myself to a couple of new bits. From a fantasy perspective, one of the things I'll get will either be Empire or Orcs and Goblins, so do let me know what you think down in the comments below. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, obviously, usual rules apply. Do please consider a like and subscribe. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much for listening. I am returned to the old world. Have a great day.